One of the most famous costumes in cinema is this plain white tank top, worn by Bruce Willis in Die Hard. But a lot of the damage you see on it didn't just happen naturally. It was deliberately faked by the film's costume designer, Marilyn Vance.
I know what a TV dinner feels like.
Today, there's a job specifically for aging and destroying costumes as described in the plot. Breakdown artists like Sarah Blostein need an intimate understanding of the scene and countless creative ways to recreate all the damage a costume endures. When done right, they might just create an iconic piece of cinema history that ends up in the Smithsonian.
A lot of what we do, the breakdown is from use.
Every piece of clothing on a movie set requires some sort of manipulation. Even a simple white shirt gets bathed in dyes or tea. But breakdown artists go far beyond that, like Sarah's work on The Boys. On set, the gunshot impacts were created by putting squibs under the actor's jacket, which left holes in the costume. But these tears looked nothing like real bullet holes.
The problem with this is that it causes the fabric to blow outwards. It would never do something like this.
One way to tackle this is to sew the holes up.
A bullet hole actually looks like a cigarette burn. The size of squib that they used made gigantic, bazooka-size holes in her jacket.
So offset, the breakdown team made the bullet holes from scratch, using a craft knife to guarantee the holes lined up precisely. Breakdown artists can also emphasize details that aren't necessarily realistic, but stand out on camera.
There is a certain amount of movie magic lying that you have to do when you do create a bullet hole and make it a bit more recognizable to the audience.
Like adding a little black paint around the edges to mimic gunpowder.
Some people misinterpret this look of bullet wipe and think that it's actually gunpowder. You wouldn't get gunpowder residue on a shot unless the muzzle was directly up against the person.
There are a number of tools you can use to create smaller rips and tears from fights. Sarah's favorite tool, a steak knife. But it's less easy to control, meaning less precision. Since she'll have to make multiple identical versions of the same outfit as backup, craft knives and seam rippers are better for consistency. When it came to the strain, she had to adjust for this apocalyptic scenario. So she needed tools like a file, a rougher, and a wire brush for more destructive tears. Some outfits, like this jacket from The Strain, are made of materials that are harder to rip. For this, she'll have to use a cheese grater.
I really only use this on things that will not break down any other way.
It's not only rips and tears. There are a bunch of different ways to represent wounds and blood, and Sarah has to decide what techniques work for the scene. In The Boys, the characters crash into a whale. The special effects team was tasked with most of the blood and guts on set, but the breakdown team had to cycle through several bloody outfits. Their biggest challenge? Getting the color of blood right to maintain continuity. When the characters first hit the whale, the blood stains are a brighter shade of red. As it dries, it appears much darker. But the breakdown team couldn't let the fake blood dry on its own, as they ended up shooting the later scenes in the episode first. That meant separate shirts for fresh and aged blood, with the stains lined up precisely. Sarah also had to factor in the different ways blood reacts to fabrics and other props.
The only time blood would really make drips like that is on something that's plastic. If it's on fabric, it tends to run in. Sometimes I find it's more realistic just to use your hands.
For something like whale guts, the material matters as much as the color. For the fresher guts, she needed something chunky that would stick to clothes and only look wet.
The silicone will kind of form to whatever is underneath. So if you do it flat, you're gonna have a flat looking shirt.
Which is why it's best to use a mannequin.
It will keep that kind of wet, clingy fabric look. When we were doing this, we'd start with a brush or with a stick and then just give up and use our hands. Because honestly, you're just smushing stuff all over and you don't really have to be artistic about it. So there's a nice gross piece up there.
For the later scenes where the guts have dried, Sarah switched to latex. It still had some shine and clung to the fabric.
Just like the blood, when they're dried, they're darker, they're kind of shriveled up.
Blood and rips are pretty common breakdown scenarios for action projects. But sometimes a scene will throw Sarah a less common situation. Like for this scene in Ready or Not, Sarah had to think about how clothes decompose on a body. She had to work on the tuxedo on this corpse, which had been buried underground for decades. First, the clothing had to reflect the context.
So this guy gets shot with a bow and arrow, but he's probably been running around before this, right? So he might have some rips, he might have some dirt, definitely some sweat.
She used black paint for the bloodstains as they'd fully dried out and congealed. Then she had to think about how the bodily changes would impact the outfit.
There's death, there's bloating, there's liquefaction, there's putrefaction, there's desiccation. I really wanted it to look like, whatever body juices seeped out into him, seeped out into his clothes.
This body was also buried in a deep pit, so Sarah mimicked the dry rot caused by moisture and added holes from moths and other insects. That's really where the rougher and file were useful. To top it all off, because the corpse was underground, it was covered in dirt. And believe it or not, recreating dirt is one of the toughest challenges of the job. Using real dirt is really unpredictable, as some dirt stains could be permanent, a problem in the event that productions do need to wash and reuse an outfit. So Sarah will replicate it with non-permanent materials. For the tuxedo, she painted on brown spots and ground up non-permanent powder to create mud stains. And for the boys, Sarah had to adjust Kenji's clothes after he brings down a ceiling on Homelander and later gets thrown through a wall by Stormfront. She went beyond dirt powder and added diatomaceous earth, a powder that simulates the dust and dirt you'd find in a tunnel. After Kenji gets thrown through the drywall, Sarah added this cellulose, which is the same material used for insulation in houses. It matched the set debris perfectly. Even the sweat stains you see on screen can be fake. This is especially true for action scenes that are shot out of order. To simulate sweat stains that stick and look wet, she sprays a mix of glycerine, water, and oils.
It won't just run everywhere, it'll kind of stay put where it's supposed to be.
None of these techniques we've mentioned so far would work for these scenes in The Boys, however, because of the super suits. These costumes were expensive and shipped from LA to Canada for the shoot, so the production team didn't have multiple versions to mess around with. So how did Stormfront and Black Noir's suits look so damaged here and here?
So we had to come up with unique and innovative ways to make the costumes look like they were damaged without actually damaging them.
Sarah used leftover fabric to recreate Stormfront's suit. That way, the breakdown team could rip it and sew in prosthetic burn wounds created by the makeup department. By painting a mushy mixture around the edges of the rips, Sarah could emulate real burn damage.
If you look at a burn, usually right around the lip of the burn, there's like a slightly lighter color that's left there. And that gives the illusion of the edge being singed and kind of melted, which is, I guess, what you would imagine for this kind of supersuit fabric.
For Black Noir's suit, the supersuits team deconstructed it into panels, allowing them to swap the original pieces for pre-damaged ones, and then back again once filming ended. And look at the pieces of shrapnel and melted bits in Black Noir's suit following a different explosion.
And then those were sewn one by one onto the costume.
So none of the damage was permanent.
Breakdown artists are a lot of things. They're scientists, they're alchemists, they're detectives,